Girlfriend is a TV show that aired on UPN for 8 seasons. That is incredibly hard to do in television. It's longer than The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, just to put it in perspective. The only reason it could make it that far is because it was incredibly popular, specifically with the Black community. Of course it was popular with Black women, which makes sense, because it was a show about Black women. But men still watch the show. Keep in mind, if you put attractive women on screen, it does give men a chance, or at least a reason, to stop turning the channel for a while. Remember, this is the pre-streaming era, and I know what you're thinking. This video is not clickbait, and it's also not an attack on anyone. I am just somebody who really enjoys processing stories that happen in media, but thinking, what are we actually watching, and why are they portraying it this way? Girlfriends is a television show, which means it is fictional, but I think the reason people liked it so much is because, to some degree, it was actually reflecting reality. It wasn't the world the way we wanted it to be. It was the world the way we kind of already knew it to exist as. If you actually watch the show, then you know that Girlfriend is primarily about dating and relationships. But after 8 seasons, only one of the 4 main characters is actually in a marriage. So you have to ask the question, why is that how they played it on screen? But from what I can tell, the writers gave us something on screen that basically explains why Black women, not all, but some, are having struggles in the dating market, specifically looking for marriage. And no, I am not making this up, and I'm pretty sure that you know I'm not making it up. If you just do a Google search, you'll find a bunch of articles that say Black women, specifically, are struggling when it comes to marriage compared to every other demographic. And the National Institute of Health did a whole study on this topic, and their conclusions were simple: that Black women are less likely to get married at all, and they get married at a later age than just about every other demographic, and on top of that, they have more marital instability when they do get married. And when Netflix put out all 8 seasons about a year or 2 ago, I found myself watching the entire thing and following the narrative. So now I've got some stuff to say because I watched it unfold, and my analytical mind kept running the entire time. So here is a breakdown of each of the 4 characters and what I believe the writers were actually trying to tell us about the world that we live in, not the world we want to live in. Because like I said before, it's probably why most fans found the show so entertaining. Even if what we were watching were some pretty dysfunctional relationship habits. I'm starting this off with the character Maya, because she's the only one who starts the show married and finishes the show married. But a whole lot of stuff happens in the middle. When the show begins, Maya's not very well educated, but more importantly, she was a teenage mother, and they play that into the plot. But I feel like that's selling her short. Yes, she did have a child while she was a teenager, but it was by a man who actually loved her enough to marry her. Because they were both young, they struggled through what marriage was supposed to look like. Her husband, Darnell, was working a whole bunch of hours trying to figure things out. He didn't have a big money job, at least not at that time, but he's still in his 20s. Most men don't at that stage. The thing about Maya is she's the only married woman for most of the show, hanging out with other single friends who seem, quote unquote, to have more going on with their lives. Not necessarily talking about Lynn, but she's another conversation, and we'll get to her later. Maya, like all the other women, is attractive, and her relationship only falls apart because another man, who I guess was more desirable, perhaps more high-powered in status and everything else, shows interest in her. Her relationship falls apart with her husband as she basically makes it clear that her heart isn't in it. She does have a child. So they do the co-parenting thing and work through all of that to a point where he's about to marry somebody else. In the middle of all that, she's trying to find herself. She goes to school a little bit. Then she writes a book and she's having success. She's doing the things that she sees her friends doing, but she wants to be married and eventually decides the man who she was with, the father of her children, was actually the best person for her to stay with. They do end up remarrying before the show ends, and they do have some more issues to work out. But ironically, by the time the show is getting ready to wrap up, he has advanced in his career. He now has a much higher paying job. She actually lives in what she called her dream house. It's almost like she has the perfect life now that not just she wanted, but almost all of her friends wanted. And it came with more or less grinding with her man to the point where they could shine together. She's the character who, on the surface, people might judge and say she made a lot of bad decisions. But interestingly enough, she got married young to someone who actually loved her, eventually figured out that relationship, has a family, and is thriving financially. And they're dealing with the storms of life, including a miscarriage, because that's a very real thing people go through. So if you just use her as a case study, relationships aren't perfect, but if you put the work in, you can survive just about anything. Because you can't keep using all that energy to argue with the person who you're with about trivial things. You might actually need that energy when life actually throws something at you. But if you're new here, I want to say thank you for even making it this far into the video. My name is Ezra, and if relationships that actually work are really what you want, I believe anybody can have it if you ask the right questions. Because if the word of God is actually true, then I've got a whole lot of repenting to do. And if anything that I say actually connects with you, it is always greatly appreciated if you would please like and subscribe. But if I don't, just let me know in the comments section, because I'll try to read them all. Moving on to the character Lynn, things change up a whole lot, because she's actually highly educated. It's one of the jokes of the show that she keeps going back to school to avoid being in the workforce. And her friends complain a little bit that she kind of mooches off of them. But what really characterizes Lynn is she's a very open-minded character. And that also comes along with the idea of her being sexually liberated. That comes up a whole lot. She gets into a whole bunch of relationships, and she considers them to be non-committal. But that's more or less a facade, because we do see her get into relationships, some of which she thought were casual hookups at the time, and then get emotionally attached, and then get hurt. All of her behavior really doesn't have anything to do with being liberated, so much of it is her past trauma. There's a lot I could say here, but remember, this is supposed to reflect something in the culture. Lynn is very open, physically with men. But the truth is, she's dealing with abandonment from her biological parents not raising her, even though she had good adopted parents. She wants to be loved desperately and wants to feel loved desperately. That explains a lot of her behavior. As the show goes on, she becomes more aware that she really doesn't know how to receive love. She even goes on a journey to learn more about where she comes from. And she really comes into her own when she engages with a few men who challenge how she deals with her sexuality. She even dates one man who tells her that he is celibate, so she tries to embrace celibacy, and it kind of sends her on an entire journey, not just in that relationship, but beyond, changing her habits and how she deals with people. Again, when the show ends, she is still unmarried. A large part of that comes from using her 20s and even some of her 30s at the time when she was still trying to find herself. She didn't really know her self-worth. She is a desirable person. All of the characters are. It seems to make sense that if she had learned to avoid the casual hookups and even talked about some of the things that were bothering her, the traumas that were unspoken for a large part of the show, things would have worked out better. Because remember, she wants desperately to be loved, wants to give love, and wants to receive love. She just doesn't really know how to do any of those things properly, which is why you can't really judge people just off of their behavior. There's almost always something big behind it that explains why they move the way that they do. Most of the time, Lynn chose men who really didn't have the skills to sustain any type of legitimate relationship. And when she did, those men decided that she wasn't really ready to sustain what they were interested in. Which now brings us to Toni, because she actually did get married at some point in the plot. But that thing fell apart epically. Toni grew up in poverty, and that had a huge impact on how she saw the world. She wanted nice things, so she was willing to do whatever she had to in order to get them. It even becomes a major sticking point between her and her friends to call her out on her materialism. And you can imagine, that doesn't work well in a relationship, because Toni does a really good job at getting the interest of men. And the way her character is played, she probably could have been married a few times before the moment when she thinks that she's settling on the man she does choose to marry. There were men who maybe didn't make enough money, or have enough of this, or have enough of that, and she would blow them off. Quite a few of these men were genuinely interested in her. I'm going to call it like I see it. The type of men that Toni wanted are the type of men who want a wife who will submit to their leadership in the marriage. Toni was not trying to submit to anybody. Definitely not her friends, and that also included anyone who was a husband. So when she finally does get married to a man who, even though he had everything on her list, aside from the fact that he was white for the purposes of the plot, and wasn't tall enough, she thought she was settling. From what they gave us in the plot, he tried to love her as best as he possibly could, but she made it very painful for him, to the point where the relationship falls apart. They even play into Toni's character that she doesn't have motherly instincts. Think about that for a moment. This woman has men who are very serious about her, but she doesn't have motherly instincts, and she's really not submissive. But she's drawing attention from men, and that's real. There are women who will have a season of life where they have a lot of attention from men, even if they don't give off what it really means to be a wife. Her character eventually gets written out of the show after season 6. But Toni, for the most part, never comes off like she's really enjoying her life. She's just kind of flying from high to high to high, trying to make it bearable. Maybe money will fulfill her. Maybe the next relationship will. And she antagonizes a whole bunch of people along the way, including her closest friends. I honestly think there are 2 big points here. One is that when it comes to getting married, and specifically staying married, men do care about your personality. That's the word I'm going to choose for it. But on the other end, when you are young and attractive, you get a lot of leeway with men. Because Toni had very legitimate men, suitors if you will, who pursued her. She just turned them down for a bunch of trivial reasons. And that also includes the man whom she did marry. And all of that leads us to the main character, Joan. Because Joan represents, as far as I'm concerned, the modern woman in all of her glory. She literally did everything that the culture told her to do. And she did it all right. But when it came to relationships, she had a whole lot of struggles. Keep in mind, when season 1 first jumps off, Joan said that she's turning 29 years old, and that she's already got a house and a successful job, and that she had hoped that by this point she would be married. So that means she thinks I did everything else right, and I just need a man to fit into the picture. And Joan ends up dating a whole bunch of guys, and some of them are better than others. But what matters most about her relationships is that most of the time when the relationship ends, to some degree the man is walking away from her. So the real question now is why. The men whom Joan really wants to go for, it's not that they're intimidated by her, but there seems to always be an imbalance in their relationships. With all of the money and success that Joan has, she seems to expect a man to be on that level or beyond. The idea is perhaps that it would be easier for her to submit to them. But when you achieve a whole lot, most of the time, those type of men whom she wants to go for aren't really looking for a woman like her. Men don't care about professional success, money, or any of that. And remember, Joan is still a very solid woman in many respects. But as time goes, she almost racks up what I would call relationship trauma. She starts putting herself out there, and the more relationships she's in, the more mistakes she's in. She finds herself even doing drugs at one point. She finds herself trying to steal a man from a friend. Joan eventually has to get real with herself that the life that she pursued, the life that she has, isn't really what fulfills her. In other words, it's not really the life she wanted. There's a scene where her and William are talking because she wants to leave the law firm, and William tells her that there's a strong difference between the two. He's like, unlike you, I actually like my job. I like law. I like litigation. I like preparing briefs. All of that excites me. He points out that Joan does it because she can. She's intelligent enough. But it's not really what gets her up out of bed in the morning. And eventually she agrees with that and decides to leave the law firm anyway, and then launches her own business endeavor, which does seem to bring more fulfillment for her. In season 8, she actually locks down a solid relationship and gets engaged. And the irony is, the man who she's engaged to is a solid man who loves her and wants to take care of her. But she has to compromise on some things that she thought that she really wanted. He's an educator, so he's intelligent and worthy of respect. But he doesn't have the type of high-profile job that she was normally looking for. On top of that, he's in the Army Reserves, and then he gets shipped out, and she has to deal with the prospect of becoming a military wife. From where Joan started, as the uber-successful professional woman, all the way to where she finishes, where she finally gets the relationship that she wanted, but has to realize she has to give some things up in order to get there. It's clear that with Joan's character, you can't actually have it all, at least not all at one time. I would argue that in Joan's backstory, she probably could have been married to a really good guy if she had made that more of a priority before focusing on her career. Things would have played out differently. But guess what? She goes into corporate America, becomes a successful lawyer, doesn't enjoy it, and then chooses to leave all of it anyway. The show gets canceled, so she never gets married on screen. But let's just assume that relationship was gonna work out. There's so much more that I could say, because William, who's one of the main characters and actually does get married in the plot, gets married to a woman named Monica. So no, she's not one of the regular four. But Monica still offers at least some conversation points. Because Monica does come from money, but unlike every other character I just mentioned, has seemingly been trained with the mentality of being a wife. That means she understands that whatever her husband has, she has. His success is her success. So it's not that she doesn't have goals, and she's actually incredibly intelligent, and she does a whole lot of stuff. And no, her personality is not perfect, but she's attractive just like all the other women. But she's unconditionally committed to her man. That never changes throughout the entire plot. And I don't just mean committed to the relationship. I mean committed to him and his success, and doing whatever she thinks is required to help him get there. It seems that she understands that when they do, they get there together. And he'll be out in front, taking all the hits and all the shots at whoever's firing him. Marriage is a central theme of the show because all of the women actually want it. Even Lynn, she desperately wants to be loved. This whole sexual liberation thing that she plays throughout the plot was, again, a facade, and she basically admits so much of it as things go on. I would argue that Monica's character is a counterbalance to the other four characters they gave us in the show, because she's a woman who's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but understood the basics of a relationship. Be committed to the person, their success, and the health of the relationship, and put that at the top of the list. And she chose a man who clearly wasn't perfect for her to marry, but he had enough for them to build together with. So if you haven't watched the show start to finish, you might want to try it, because it's actually pretty deep, and there's a whole lot going on in there. And the reason the show was so popular is because sometimes it's almost like looking in a mirror at the reality we see around us. Relationships aren't rocket science, and all these characters, these four beautiful women, wanted to be in one. And the only time they made progress to get closer to what they actually wanted is when they actually made changes along the way. Made it all the way to the end of this video. I do have to admit that thank you doesn't do it justice anymore, because you are a real one. And if you want more from me beyond this video, just realize I ain't got no shame in my game. This is a new channel, so it is always greatly appreciated if you would please like and subscribe.